Hi, everyone. This is Eric Johnson, and welcome back to Logtech Live. This is our third episode, and I am so glad to be here and glad you all could join us. I'm here once again from my home in Alexandria, Virginia, and really delighted to have an opportunity to speak with you all again. I love this format. I'm really going to enjoy kind of experimenting with it in the months ahead. Figuring out what works, what doesn't work, but really enjoying the chance to interact with some of my favorite people in the industry and also all of you. So thanks again for tuning in. And also thanks, as always, to our sponsor, Chain.io. Without them, we couldn't do this. So thank you to Chain.io for sponsoring. And it's the start of October. We're in Q4 of the craziest year of all time after the last craziest year of all time. I'm excited. My birthday is Monday. And remember, there's no better birthday gifts than juicy story tips. So please send those my way. Twitter, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, email. There's a million different ways to reach me. So don't be shy. I'm at the end of my second iced coffee, so I think I'm ready to go. We have a great guest today. Angela Czajkowski from the freight forwarder and customs broker Shapiro is going to be joining me in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to do our normal rundown of kind of the news that I think is super important for us to think about. Some of it's more supply chain related, some of it's more on the tech side. But with no further ado, let's get started. And I'm going to start by sort of shamelessly hyping some of my own recent tweets. Just because I think they're good conversation starters for what I want to chat about this morning. So this I tweeted out a couple weeks ago, and I found it really interesting because while the world is sort of like taken this huge interest into the supply chain like never before, as usual, there's sort of a tendency to sort of look for the magic bullet, the thing that is behind everything, right? And the physical manifestation of that has generally been ships, whether it was the Ever Given being stuck in the Suez Canal or the current, huge number of ships offshore in LA Long Beach, Savannah, even in ports in China. Those are very kind of easy visuals to kind of wrap your head around and decide that's where the problem lies. Well, I had a shipper who told me a couple weeks ago, really the problem stems from labor. The fact that in the U.S. it's really hard to get labor right now and get consistent labor and have labor work the hours that are sort of needed to work through all of the cargo in DC's warehouses, back into terminals, transload facilities, consolidation facilities, all of these spots where cargo kind of gets handled and moves from one leg to another, and finally unpacked and sent to a store. Those are the problem. That's the area where this is all sort of spiderwebbing out to. And what you're seeing visually on the water is a bit of a manifestation of that. So this is for me an example of kind of peeling back the layers a little bit and trying to figure out exactly what is right, or what is sort of the genesis of some of this stuff, and not necessarily fixating on the things that are a little bit easier to fixate on. So the next tweet I'm going to highlight in shameless promotion time this morning is something that sort of dawned on me a couple weeks ago, and that's this whole idea of there is one set of parties to blame and everybody else is sort of, the protagonist in the story and there's a villain on the other side. I think we've sort of lost sight, and people who are new to the industry sort of don't understand that chaos is a generator of profit for a lot of people in the logistics industry and always has. And that's because it's a chaotic industry, right? Like if you think about the basic idea of taking goods that are made in a literally the other side of the earth and figuring out all the governmental regulations, all the local transportation kind of quirks, all of the infrastructure issues, all of the complexity of doing business in all the different parts of the world, and making that easier. Even in times when things are pretty straightforward, it's still super complex and fairly chaotic, and there tends to be a lot of sort of anomalies or disruptions to sort of get around. So that is why we have so many entities in this business, because their job is to make things easier. And yes, they need to get paid for that. So I wrote this because I think it's important that we focus not on the people who are profiting necessarily from the complexity, which has always happened, but let's try to figure out if there's entities that are sort of contributing to the complexity and therefore profiting. Because I think that's a huge distinction that's escaping a lot of people right now. And it makes me think that this whole idea of focusing on sort of one set of parties as the root of all evil made me think of this fable that's called Blind Man and an Elephant. And that's basically the story that, and I'm going to butcher this story, but bear with me, is basically that a group of men who cannot see come across an elephant, and they each are touching different parts of the elephant. And in their head, they're making a determination about what this thing is that they're touching. And one person is touching the trunk, and one person is touching the tail, and another person is touching feet, and they all come to different conclusions because they can't see the whole picture. They can't see that this is parts of a giant elephant. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now. Everybody sort of touches their own little piece of this and sort of has ideas about what the root problem is. I won't say in the industry, but especially people outside who are reading and maybe getting a little bit of a simplistic view of what's going on. So I think we all could use a little bit of step back, everyone in the industry and especially outside, to understand these complications. So now let's move into a couple things that I covered over this past week that I think are really interesting. So I wrote about a company called Cargo Logic. You probably have not heard of them. You may not have heard of them. And I'm not championing them over the dozens of other technology providers in the forwarding space. But I think they're interesting because it sort of shows that this industry that we're in, on the software side especially, it sort of ebbs and flows. You have a lot of interesting companies that come up and they get traction or they don't. The ones that get traction over a long period of time tend to get acquired because they might have a niche role that they fill, and there's a bigger software provider that has a big gap in its sort of capability, and it wants to add that, or it wants the customers from that niche provider. So they get acquired. What does that do? That consolidation creates opportunities at the smaller end as well. And so we've seen in the last decade, we've seen a ton of activity around companies saying, we can target small and mid-sized forwarders with this system that is really kind of lightweight for them to use and gives them kind of a stake in the game against really well-capitalized bigger players, whether it be companies that are venture-backed or companies that have just been around a long time and have a lot of cash to spend on IT. So, Cargo Logic was my kind of view into this space and how there's always this sort of regeneration of new entrants who think differently, use modern tech, and kind of recast the forwarding software industry in unique ways. And then lastly, touch on another story that I wrote this week, and this was really interesting, and this was actually a lot of fun because it's based off of a case that's in front of the FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission, right now. And I'm not going to, and this story does not dive into all the different tentacles of that case, which is at its heart about whether a shipping line has been appropriately charging a demurrage, which is the time spent a container spends on a terminal yard past the point at which the carrier has contracted with the party that's supposed to pick it up. I'm not going to go into all the validity of the case. What I found really interesting was the case kind of originated from a tech issue. Something called the arrival notice was sent from the carrier. There's arrival notice, meaning the container has arrived, it's ready for pickup. Was sent to what the party that was supposed to pick it up said is a wrong email address. And so they did not know that these containers were available for pickup for days after the container actually arrived. And that created a situation where they owed these storage fees to the container. So they're contesting them, but really this is a tech issue at heart. Is there a better way to convey this critical information about when a container is available than simply having an email And in this case, having a system that generates an email and predicts what is the right person or email address to email this critical piece of information. There's lots of layers to this. I encourage you to read the story and our other reporting on the case. I encourage you to read the FMC case too, if you're really interested and nerdy on this. But I found it fascinating because it just dawned on me again that everything is related to tech these days. So with no further ado, I want to bring Angela in, and I have a ton of stuff to ask you about today, Angela. But first, welcome to Logtech Live. And let's start off. Can you give a quick introduction for those of those who are attending and don't know you or haven't heard you talk before?
Sure thing. Thank you so much for having me, Eric. My name is Angela Czajkowski. I am the Director of Supply Chain at Samuel Shapiro and Company. Samuel Shapiro and Company is a 106-year-old freight forwarder and customs house broker headquartered here in Baltimore, Maryland. And while the term digital versus legacy forwarder, has been around for a while, we find that we are frequently classified as what one might think of as a legacy forwarder. But for us, we have always brought technology into our business and our processes and have adopted it and really learned to rely on our systems as part of our value proposition to our customers. Yep.
That is something that we have talked about a lot, which is one of the reasons why I wanted you on today. And just to give you an idea of how long Angela and I have known each other, I think we first met when I was reporting either right around the 100th anniversary of Shapiro or the year before when we talked a little bit about what you guys were doing TMS wise. So we've had a lot of conversations over the years, but how did you originally get into supply chain?
So back in my day, you didn't get a supply chain degree. If you wanted to do something in international business and trade, you got an international business degree. And it was through that course of study where I thought I was going to be traveling the world. But I realized the magnitude and just how dynamic international trade really was. And through the course of my studies, discovered logistics and supply chain. And I realized that there was something about that which was connecting global commerce and how excited I felt by it. So that's really how I found my way. I sought out work with a freight forwarder and customs house broker, which I hear a lot of people say is not the normal career path, but I did. I went looking for a third party who was sort of bringing solutions to a variety of clients.
Yeah, honestly, you're the only person I've ever met who wasn't involved, who didn't have a family member or, wasn't sort of brought into the business that way, who was like, no, I'm going to work for a freight forwarder. So that's what makes your story really unique. And also the fact that you pursued that from an educational perspective long before, it was in vogue. And now, I mean, we've talked about this before and we'll get into this later, but there's lots of, it's rare to find a university now that doesn't have a supply chain focus. Maybe not a full degree, but at least a department that's focused on
right.
Which is great. Well, so I want to, in terms of setting the stage for some more specific things that I wanted to talk about today, I am interested. This is, it's not all, sugar and fancy fun times traveling the world and jet setting and all that. What do you find right now at this stage of your career is the best thing about supply chain? And then I want you to think about the absolute worst thing about supply chain.
It's easy to answer the best thing. And I say this very openly. I don't think I've ever had the same day twice. So for me, I have found in my career, every single day, there is a new challenge. There is a problem to solve. There are ways of expanding knowledge and applying solutions. And truly, for somebody who wants to be developing and growing, that has been the best part of this business, is that I have been challenged every single day. I have been given opportunities to bring solutions, to create, and to be creative. And I think that that's maybe the best part of this career that I've chosen. So I'm really enamored by our business and our industry and by global trade in general. the worst. If I had to say what is the worst thing, and I don't think that gosh, it's really hard not to apply some sort of recency effect to this, because right now we're talking about absolute mayhem and we're going to say, what's the worst part? I think the worst part is for anybody who wants to be able to help and to affect change and to provide order and solutions, that we sometimes find ourselves, and I think right now is the prime example of that, we find ourselves in situations where we can't control enough to create the change that we need. We can't control the chaos. We can't control enough to bring resolution to a customer's problem, to stop the demurrage, to get everything moved when we need it, where we need it, at the right price. And I think that for someone who likes to bring that sort of comfort to our customers, it's really hard to be in a business where we sometimes really do lack control.
Yeah, you're not in the driver's seat for a lot of what you do, right? And
Right.
I had someone tell me the other day that, everyone focuses on capacity and what is my rate and all this. He said, all it boils down to for me is partners, right? Like if you have the right partners, they stick by you and they help you get the things you need done. And I mean, right now is a bad example, right? Even the best partners are not being able to deliver as everyone would like, but it makes a difference. You're still differentiated from everybody else's partnerships when you have really strong ones, right? So, but I hear you. The lack of control over what no matter how good you do your job, the lack of control over that total picture must be completely frustrating right now. So definitely sympathize with everyone out there who's in that position. Well, we're going to address the chaos, the mayhem. I think you described it in a bit, but I know we could spend our entire time talking about that. So I did want to talk about things like tech first. We've had what must be dozens of conversations, both on stage at JOC events, on the phone, text exchanges, lunches, about how you guys think about tech at Shapiro. And I'm curious, given we've had like a 6-7 year stretch where we've talked about this, if your sort of approach or your thought process around what moves the needle for you to invest in has changed or evolved at all.
I think there are broad headings where any freight forwarder, 3PL, customs house broker must be focusing tech resources. I think that for us, what has maybe changed is because we had always taken the approach of being a custom shop, because it really did align with our service, our value proposition, our customer base and needs. But I also think that as we've seen, and you mentioned this in your intro, as we've seen new products come onto the market and we've evaluated what is available, not just broadly speaking technologically, but also very specific to our industry, I think that we have adjusted. And I would hope that everyone who has a tech focus within their organization has adjusted what they're choosing to build in-house versus what they're choosing to add on to their own systems versus what they're choosing to maybe relinquish some control on. And I think that for us, it's been very much about always kind of keeping an eye on the field and making choices that are sensible for our brand, because not every forwarder has the same objectives, the same client base, the same needs, the same deliverables, goals. So I think for us, it's been what matters most for our growth and our customers' growth and servicing those customers. I think like one conversation that we have all had is visibility, and we will never stop having a conversation about visibility and just how imperative it is to global supply chains, but also because we really haven't gotten it right. And it feels like we're talking about some, problem of the past, but it really isn't. It's still very much at the forefront of everything that we do as brokers and forwarders, as importers and shippers, and everyone in supply chain. Visibility matters so much to every decision that we make, and yet we're still finding needs to tweak how we get it and how we give it. I think that has our focus changed? Yes, and I think in positive ways, because there is more available to us as time goes on.
Yeah, I can recall, I think when we first chatted with you and some of your colleagues, you all were very, very, I won't say insistent, but you were very confident that what part of what made you different from a tech perspective was you had this system that you had built that was really catered to your customers' needs. And I think I would hope, at least at that point, I challenged you and said, well, are your resources best spent on that versus someone who spends 100% of their time only on building tech, and you can kind of leverage off of that, right? And I think you've got it right in terms of your perspective right now, because it almost has to be a constantly evolving thing at this point, right? Because there's so much coming in the market. Everybody is a little bit different in terms of their customer makeup, in terms of where they are falling short right now, and what they need to prioritize, right? Like every forwarder, even the same size forwarder, doesn't need to prioritize the same product or the same tool for their customers, even from an outward perspective, if they look exactly the same, right? So how do you sort of handle what I see as a very confusing market to figure that out? Because you sort of know, I would imagine, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and how do you map that out against a market that is like consolidating in one area, growing in another area, lines are blurring between provider and standalone software company, and how do you manage that?
It's not easy. As you said, even just in asking that question, you explained why is it confusing. And it is hard to understand what's going to help us bring the greatest value to our customers. Our customers, that's our goal, that's our objective, and that's really at the heart of who we are as a company. So when we're looking at it, we're taking the approach of what enables us to do our functional jobs well, and then what is it that brings that value out to our customers, and how our customers engage with us and our Shapiro ecosystem. I think that how do we make sense of all of that confusing information, all of those inputs? It's about a lot of research and a lot of conversations. And we have found ourselves in the presence of a user community where we have all been very willing to share. So I think that other forwarders and 3PLs and brokers, especially as we've been on this journey, we have found our way to one another in a really collaborative sort of manner, as far as sort of what do you like about that system, and what, how did you overcome that? And I think that the user community and people sharing through publication and through just conversation has been really helpful as we read about new products.
That's interesting, because I think, and tell me if is that a divergence from the past? Because it seems to me that like part of the drive of, I need my own system that does exactly the same thing as 30 other systems do, was no, I need to keep my kind of secrets guarded. And I agree with you. I hear a lot from forwarders now who are like, oh yeah, we chatted with them and they said this system sucks for this part, but we need, so like, is that changed?
I can't say if it's changed or not, because we were always in our own silo. We built everything. We were, because we were custom on so many levels, we didn't enter into some of those conversations from an asking perspective. We might have been willing to share when it was something that we hadn't built or that we had, but I think that to kind of emerge and then learn that we are all having the same conversations, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be as you said, a very tightly guarded. It's very much of what are you enjoying about this experience with this provider, or how did you make that selection? And I think that when we talk about the publication side of hearing who's doing what with what, kind of helps to guide and form some of those conversations.
Yep. Do you have a dedicated person or group of people who spend part of their time just sort of like constantly keeping an eye on the market? I
spend a fair amount of my time doing it, but I think we've got, maybe it's not dedicated in as much as you're looking at it from a strategic viewpoint 100% of the time. But I think that so many of us are engaged with what our system is and does and needs, and then those customer needs and what requests are coming in. I think there are multiple people within our organization who are constantly having those discussions and evaluating the playing field and working with our in-house IT to understand the need and how it might work.
Yep. I think that's the hardest thing. One of the hardest things now is like, how much time can you devote especially right now where you could fill a 10-hour day without even thinking about it, right? Having nothing to do with where you need to be 2 to 5 years from now. Do you do you ever get requests from investors to sort of understand the industry at all, or is that no?
No.
Interesting. This is something I'm sort of increasingly interested about, is like how much investors talk to people who are actually like right in the middle of this. I'm not inviting all the investors who are listening, by the way, to bombard Angela's email inbox, but I am curious because I think part of the I won't say missing link, but there has been a bit of a gap between like understanding what an actual, use sort of target user for some of these systems is actually struggling with, right? So, and the hard part is they could talk to you and maybe 3 people in your position at other forwarders, and they're probably going to get like 3 totally different perspectives on it, right? So that doesn't necessarily help them decide what a transformative piece of technology is going to be, but it would give them a pretty accurate picture of how fragmented things are. Well, maybe that's a good lead-in to talk about. You mentioned in your intro about digital forwarder. It's obviously something I've written about a lot, and I've had to evolve my thinking about what to call them, what their place in the market is, how differentiated they actually are from a company that's 106 years old and has all that experience and expertise. How do you sort of view this model? And I'd also be interested to know, have you sort of looked at what they do and kind of borrowed anything from what they do in terms of incorporating it into your business?
How do we look at them as any other competitor, honestly. I mean, and I think that what the conversation surrounding digital forwarders was such an important one, and one that our industry was really ready for. For us, we've been on our own journey, our own products journey, and how we apply technology. So it never really mattered to us what it was called or how you applied what terminology to it. Yep. That was something that we had always done. I think that having the discussion about an industry that was so ready for a transformation in how we apply technology was really a welcome discussion. For me, it didn't necessarily change how we looked at our technology or our service offering, because it was something that had always been so firmly planted on our radar. I do think that it's exciting though to see that that's sort of getting traction. Have we borrowed? No, I don't think so. I feel like our journey has always been very much defined by our value proposition, our mission statement, our customers. So because of our size and our sort of corporate culture and our brand, we've very much defined sort of what we want to do and how we want to do it. Now, we're of course open and exploring what's available, and we've talked about sort of other systems, but for us, I think we've remained very true to who we are as a company, knowing that the needs for technology will remain constant.
Yeah, it's. I actually heard a podcast earlier this week from one of those forwarders, someone at one of those forwarders, and it was interesting to hear them, sort of describe. And this is nothing new. I mean, it was just sort of reinforced. It was, I think, what set in their head that there was this opportunity was literally the online presence, like the website. They sort of talked about, this person talked about how the websites were so archaic this is like in 2012, 2013, relative to what they were seeing in other markets. And that's what sort of told them there was this big opportunity to be exploited. That's not what you hear about today, right? Because everybody has a decent to really good website now. What you hear about today is, how do I take all the customer information that a forwarder has access to and use that data to make their lives better, to make the suppliers' lives better? That's the conversation that I think where this is transformed into. And to your point, I think that's been a big benefit to the industry. I think they sort of sharpened everyone's minds around where the industry needed to go in a much quicker time span than maybe it would have happened ordinarily. I don't know.
Well, and something sorry to interrupt, something you and I've talked about in the past, Eric, was what customers bring from a technology perspective. So it's not just looking to us as the service provider, but what they themselves are bringing, and then their expectations in return of that, and how we're seeing that evolve. So if a customer doesn't come with their own TMS, then of course they need a partner who provides. But for those who come with their own, those needs are totally different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And I think that's going to be an interesting kind of point, like as we sit in near the end of 2021, where things go from now. Because I think, that a lot of the forwarders have this idea that the digital forwarders, I was going to say, have this idea that they will eventually evolve into a platform, right? That everybody connects into, or they connect into everyone else. And it will be interesting to see whether, because that's not the traditional way that shippers like to work, right? They don't like to be beholden to a single platform, right? And it will be interesting to see if they can create kind of a version of this platform idea that works for shippers now and into the future. And I don't know what the answer is, honestly. I think about it a lot, but I don't know what the answer is. I think there's one, and I've talked about this a lot before, maybe not on this show, but in other discussions. I think one of the cool things that's happened over the past 10 years is just the amount of talent that's been brought into the industry with all of the funding. Like, a lot of money tends to bring in very talented people, right? And so I think we're going to start to reap the benefits of that over the next 5 to 10 years. But there also appears to be a bit of a gap right now. And so I wanted to sort of transition a little bit to something that I know you think about a lot, and we've talked about, in the past, is talent. Like, how do you bring in the right talent to keep your company on the cutting edge, very customer focused, and technologically adept as that sort of becomes more important? How do you think about this? And is it hard for you to compete in the talent market when the job of being a forwarder is more demanding, and yet there's more demand for that talent, not just in our industry, but outside?
One of the conversations that we've always had surrounding technology is not to eliminate the need for people in the business, but to allow those people to focus on the value-added services and problem solving that must take place within freight forwarding and custom SaaS brokerage. I think that for us, we are, and maybe right now is the worst time to be talking about how we apply talent because of the craziness, because it requires so many more hands for transactions or so many more touches on a transaction. But even in a normal time, I think that with the right technology tools, our customer service levels remain or even become more acute because we're not focusing on the repetitive manual tasks. I think finding talent I don't think there's a lack of talent. I think it's what must that talent bring. We need less of a certain function now, but we need a higher touch on either the technology side or the customer service side. I think that allowing the talent that we have to flourish in a service aspect or in their tech aspect has been and will continue to be so important for us. We've hired a lot of folks, and we're having to tell people, this is not normal. This is not normally how it is. Your day normally has maybe a bit more rhythm to it and a bit more flow and fewer sort of hard stops and fires to put out. And some people thrive and really do love that. But I think that right now, to even explain this business to somebody who's entirely new to the industry and not say this is not normal, we would be lying if we didn't admit how many times we've maybe had to have that conversation. I also think that when we look at what the market was previously, that bringing on more talent in the IT realm, or freeing up our IT talent to focus on those innovative projects, has been something that's very much on our minds. So allowing them to build out our customer facing tools and bringing on individuals who have more of a UX or maybe it's graphic design, or maybe it's simply just an awareness of systems and requirements and business analysts. So I think for us, it's looking at both sides of the house and how we must continue to evolve in our building our bench.
Yeah, I think about people who've come to this industry in the last year and have this like baseline of what things are right now, how how their how their initial impression of the industry must be colored by like how crazy it is right now relative to a kind of quieter period. It's sort of like kids who've entered school during COVID and don't know that you don't wear a mask in school, right? Normally. So yeah, it's kind of nuts. One other aspect to the technology thing or the labor thing is it is interesting to see a lot of companies in the sort of digital 3PL space talk about the number of people they add in certain regions. And I have to think that people who've been in this industry a long time are like, yeah, that's still important. That's a sign. Like even as digital as you get, you still need people, you still need boots on the ground, you still need touch points in local areas, right? So 5 minutes, we have about 5 minutes left, which should be plenty of time to diagnose all of the problems going on in the supply chain, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. But we are going to touch on this. So one of the things I was most curious to talk to you about is, so you talked about earlier about how it's frustrating to not be able to make your customers happy right now. But I want to step back and say, is the current environment as a 3PL, is it a good, bad, both environment for you right now?
Both. I mean, and so I'll say it, let's break it down. The good side. We are a solutions-driven provider. We are all about high customer service, high customer touch. So for us to be able to dig in, as I talked about in the beginning, to be able to dig in and problem solve and work with customers where they bring problems that are hugely impactful, and we sit down and we strategize and we give that solution. It's a great time for somebody who thrives, for an organization that thrives on problem solving and being a true partner to a customer and not just a vendor. That's great. We hate that our customers are having challenges. We love being a partner to our customers and solving them. The other side of that is when the solution is sometimes not pleasant or not tenable for a customer. I mean, we have situations where we simply have to say, none of the solutions are great based on the goals or objectives. You know, it's a really tough time to deliver that, but we are, if nothing else, a very honest and frank partner. So we are very open to saying, this is how we see it. This is what we think we can do. This is how we would do it with you. And I think that, so that's what maybe makes it a bad time, because we can't always do everything we would like to do. And no one can right now. As you said, in the article that you brought up, where the challenges lie, it's not just one place where we could all focus some resources and energy on fixing this problem and then it all goes away. It's a really, it's an interconnected web right now, and we're all trying to kind of work our way through it together with the shipping community.
Yeah, the ports in LA and Long Beach moving to 24-hour operations has been a perfect example. Like, I mean, 18 years ago, I was covering the move to Pier Pass, right? That was becoming a thing. And it's like, well, here we are 18 years later, and we still have not connected the dots that opening terminals 24 hours doesn't work if truckers don't serve at that time, if receiving facilities aren't open at those same hours and don't have the labor to staff at those hours. So it is such a complicated thing. And I'm interested. I won't say whether I'm glad or not glad that the broader world is interested in our space, but I find it interesting how much this is captivated. Are you finding yourself in positions where you're having to describe to people what's going on? And my main question is, do they want the 30-minute version, or do they want the TLDR version?
So it's funny, when we make mainstream news, it's kind of big, and that's when my phone starts ringing.
Yep.
And I think that everybody is becoming keenly aware of what's going on, because it's hitting us at the consumer level, because we as consumers are being told, your sofa will not be here. I'm sorry, your vehicle will not be here. And no joke, I've made probably half a dozen orders in the last 2 months where I've gotten, due to supply chain disruptions, we can't deliver this. And I thought, I'm the understanding consumer because I get it. But I think when what we do in our industry hits the consumer level, I think it's brought a heightened awareness to just what it is that we require for global trade to function smoothly. And so how do I get to spend explaining it? I'll go for as long as they will allow me. But, those of us in this business who just love what we do, I think tend to do that. And I think that as we see the solutions coming through, I hope that we are all kind of at the forefront of being able to say it's going to get better.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I will go on as long as someone allows me to go on, but I can start to see, I joked on Twitter the other day, I can start to see the soul in their eyes die off the deeper I get into this. It's like, do you want to know what the difference between an NVO and a freight forwarder is? I'm going to go get another beer. Be right back. Right. So that's what everyone is interested in it, but to a point, I think has been my experience. So, Angela, I'm sure we could talk for another hour, but people have work to do, so including you. So thank you so much for being here. This was a great conversation as always, and encourage people to reach out to you on LinkedIn, but not investors unless they ask you first, if you're okay talking to them. Thanks again for your great perspective on all this stuff, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we are going to swiftly move into the normal wrap-up segments of our show. First, dad joke of the month. Unfortunately, my son told me a great one, and I forgot it. So that one's going to have to wait till our November show. So in the meantime, you get a really, really corny one from me. Here goes. What is blue and not heavy? Light blue. Let's keep it simple, people. Let's not overthink this. So that's your dad joke for the week. You're welcome to that one. You don't have to pay me any royalties or commissions unless you want to. And again, best commission is juicy story tips. So keep those coming my way. Let's wrap up the show now. We have about 3 minutes left with buzzword of the week. And this is something that I actually wrote about in my last newsletter last Friday, which is this concept called human in the loop. And basically, and I'm going to do a bad job of describing this because I'm not technology, I'm not trained in technology. I just pretend that I know what I'm talking about. But humans in the loop essentially are programs that are designed to incorporate the interaction between a human and a system. There's a couple different aspects to this. There's help, where the system and a human coexist to sort of make decisions or interpret or analyze data, to augment what a human could do on their own. I think that the sort of secondary and deeper use of human in the loop is that the system is learning how the human works, and it understands what the human likes, what does and doesn't work. It understands what the human does and what the human omits, all to train a data model or a machine learning model to perform on its own a little bit better. So there's a little bit of a kind of sinister aspect to this in a way that you're sort of training a program to do what you do. I wrote in this about how eventually my job as a writer could go this way. Every time I type something in a Google Doc, or I text something to someone, I just presume that Google or Apple has some sort of model that is learning how I text and what I write, and it's training that model to somehow do that better. So hopefully this, I encourage you all to read the newsletter that I wrote last week, where I dig a little bit deeper into this, and my very sort of superficial explanation of it here will get you intrigued. Clearly, this is happening. This is not a situation where I have to explain whether this is going to catch on or not. This is already happening. I hear a lot of founders talking about this right now. There are situations where we are helping train models, and maybe some of those jobs will absolutely not go away, and the models just get more complicated, and the decisions and the dynamics of the market get more complicated, and there will always need to be someone. There will also be situations where absolutely the model will learn well enough to do the job. So we need to think about what that future looks like. And back to the talent discussion we had with Angela, we're in a rapidly changing market, and we need to think about what what skills we need in the future and what jobs are going to be there in the future. And that's as soon as 5 to 10 years because of all the capital that's come into the industry. So thank you again to everyone who tuned in. Really appreciate it. Thank you again to Angela. Great as always. And if you need to reach out to me. I'm at Logtech Eric on Twitter. LinkedIn is, you can find me very easily on LinkedIn. I'm at Eric .Johnson at ihsmarket.com is my work email. Lots of ways to reach out. Love your feedback both on this and on what you'd like to see in future episodes. But thank you again for tuning in. Thank you again to Chain.io for sponsoring as always, and we will see you a month from now.